11 days until the Georgia primary election, and the big news today, former Vice President Mike Pence will be here to campaign with Governor Kemp one day before the election. Joining me is Chuck Todd, the moderator of NBC's Meet the Press. An interesting dynamic here, Chuck, and it's forming with President Trump backing David Perdue in the governor's race, while former Vice President Pence now siding with Governor Kemp. Interesting, though not surprising.
It is, and it's easy now, right? You see that, you could see where things are headed directionally. So, a winning campaign suddenly get a lot more extra supporters on it. So, this would be more impressive if they had been on the side of, Kemp, say, a year ago, right? But better late than never for some of these folks. But it certainly shows you that there is a group of Republicans that are desperate for Trump to be marginalized. And they look for these opportunities and hope that they can jump on the bandwagon and do it. I will go back to something I've said to you before. I do think we shouldn't overrate what's happened here in this governor's primary as somehow a sign that Trump's weakening. David Perdue's been a terrible candidate. David Perdue had no explanation for why he wanted to be governor. Yeah. And governor's races are different from federal races. And so I would just be careful reading this as somehow, the Republican Party is rebuking Trump. No, Georgia Republicans are rebuking David Perdue for not having any reason to run for governor. He's never articulated one.
Do you think former President Trump's influence now, at least in Georgia, among Republicans is diminished? Mm-hmm. Or is it essentially the same as it has been?
There's two ways to look at Trump's influence. Trump, the individual, I think his abilities to influence might be diminishing a bit, but Trumpism is not diminishing. In some ways, you look at what we're seeing in some other primaries, and there are people that are even Trumpier than Trump that are seeing a surge in a place like Pennsylvania, for instance. And he's suddenly coming in and going, no, go with my more institutionally supported candidate, Dr. Oz, And it shows you that I think this movement is gotten bigger and is harder to control, that even Trump can't fully control it. So that's what I mean here. We got to be careful. I think there's certainly Trump, the individual, I think it might be losing a little influence, but it doesn't mean Trumpism isn't, right? It doesn't mean the establishment is winning. It actually means the grassroots are winning, and they've sniffed out who they think is phony MAGA versus real MAGA.
So in our most recent poll around here at 11 Alive, the top three issues for Georgia voters, economy, crime, and health care, they're pretty much that way wherever you go. And Governor Kemp here leading Stacey Abrams by 5 points in a potential matchup. Have Georgia Democrats, and by extension national Democrats, made the case to voters maybe they're better at these three things, economy, crime, and health care, than the Republicans so far in 2022?
I think not on economy and crime. I think every poll I've seen gives the Republicans an advantage there. Healthcare is something that Democrats continue to have an advantage on in the polling that I've seen. But in two of those three issues, look, I'll bring up a fourth because we're starting to see, and that's abortion rights. I think in particular governor's races, abortion rights is going to be more litigated, frankly, than in some federal races. And part of it is because if it is indeed Roe v. Wade is repealed, then all of the action is in the states. And that will become more front and center, particularly, I think, in the battleground states, Georgia being one of them. But I believe this in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, that the hot presidential states will have the similar thing, especially where you have Republican legislatures and competitive governor's races. So I do think that issue is still likely. We got some polling that's coming out Sunday. I would equate it with watching a gathering storm, like in the tropics. You're like, wow, it's not a Category 5 hurricane yet, but it could be. Yeah. You start to see the formation, and boy, when the clinics actually close, when the bans get put into effect, you can see how this only grows in importance in this election.
Meet the Press airs Sunday morning at 10 on 11 Alive. Chuck, thanks a lot.
You got it, buddy.